Donald Trump walked into one of the most secure military bases in the country, completely unannounced, and did something that left highly trained soldiers speechless. No cameras, no press, no publicity stunt, just a moment that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. What happened inside Fort Bragg that day, and what secret from his past did it uncover? At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a military base known for secrecy and precision, nothing ever happened without careful planning. Every visitor, every operation, every movement was monitored and authorized in advance. But on this particular morning, something completely unexpected shattered the routine. Without prior notice, a convoy of black SUVs rolled through the security checkpoint, bypassing the usual clearance procedures. The base's communication officers scrambled for answers. No one had been informed of a high-profile arrival. Then, as the lead vehicle came to a stop, the back door swung open and Donald Trump stepped out. No cameras, no press, no large security detail, just Trump himself, flanked by only a handful of personnel. Soldiers nearby exchanged confused glances, and whispers rippled through the base. Why was he here? Inside the command center, Colonel James Harper, the base commander, stared at the security feed in disbelief. "Get me intel, now!" But there was no scheduled briefing, no official reason for his presence. Trump wasn't heading toward the administration offices or the war room. Instead, he was walking straight toward the Tactical Combat Training Facility, a restricted area where only elite special forces trained. Security personnel tensed, watching his every move. Was this a test? A challenge? Or something else entirely? No one knew for sure, but one thing was clear. This wasn't an ordinary visit, and whatever was about to happen next would leave everyone in Fort Bragg speechless. Inside Fort Bragg's command center, Colonel James Harper gripped the edge of his desk, his gaze locked onto the live security feeds. Donald Trump was still walking straight toward the Tactical Combat Training Facility. The room buzzed with tension as officers and intelligence analysts scrambled for answers. No one had been briefed about this visit, no security clearance had been pre-approved. And yet, there he was, moving with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Outside, soldiers exchanged wary glances. Some murmured questions under their breath. "Is this some kind of drill?" one asked. Another shook his head. "Not a chance. Look at the brass. They're just as confused as we are." Even the most senior officers were caught off guard. A security officer in full tactical gear stepped forward, hand resting near his holster, ready to intervene if necessary. Trump wasn't following protocol, and no one knew what his next move would be. As he neared the reinforced doors of the training facility, tension in the air thickened. Inside the command center, Colonel Harper turned to his intelligence team. "I don't care what it takes. Find out why he's here." But deep down, he already knew. Something big was about to happen. As Trump approached the reinforced steel doors of the Tactical Combat Training Facility, the guards on duty hesitated. The TCTF was a classified area, reserved for elite special forces operators, where hand-to-hand combat, counter-terrorism drills, and live-fire exercises were conducted daily. Unauthorized personnel never entered without clearance, especially not civilians. A security officer, his posture rigid, stepped in front of the door, hand hovering near his holster. "Sir, this area is restricted," he said firmly. "Only authorized personnel beyond this point." But Trump didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge the warning. Instead, he reached for the heavy door and pushed it open, walking inside as if he belonged there. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Inside, the room was alive with movement. Soldiers sparring on the combat mats, instructors shouting commands, the distinct smell of sweat and gunpowder lingering in the air. At the far end of the room, Sergeant Major Eric Dalton, one of the most seasoned Special Forces combat instructors, was overseeing a high-level training session. The moment Trump stepped inside, the energy in the room shifted. Conversations stopped. Soldiers turned. Dalton narrowed his eyes, arms crossing over his chest. What was he doing here, and more importantly, what was he about to do? Trump walked straight onto the combat training mat, his gaze scanning the battle-hardened soldiers around him. Every man in that room had spent years mastering the art of hand-to-hand combat, counter-surveillance, and close-quarters battle. And yet, it wasn't them studying him, it was him studying them. The room was dead silent as Sergeant Major Eric Dalton, a seasoned Green Beret combat instructor, stepped forward. He had trained elite operatives, SEALs, Delta Force, even top-level counter-terrorism units, but he had never trained a former U.S. president. Trump smirked. "Let's see what you've got." Dalton's brow furrowed. "Sir, this is a live combat training session, not a demonstration." Trump didn't blink. "I know exactly what it is." Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he shrugged off his jacket, loosened his tie, and rolled up his sleeves. Dalton turned to the officers standing nearby, expecting them to intervene, but no one moved. Trump stepped onto the mat. "Come on!" His tone wasn't playful, it was commanding. For the first time in his career, Dalton hesitated. Was this a joke, a stunt, or something else entirely? One way or another, he was about to find out. Sergeant Major Eric Dalton exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance. He had sparred against some of the most elite fighters in the world, but this was different. This was the former President of the United States standing in front of him, on a classified military training mat, challenging him to a fight. Dalton decided to test the waters first. A controlled movement, a quick grab meant to off-balance Trump and end this in seconds. It was routine, a maneuver that worked on rookies and even seasoned operatives who weren't expecting it. But something unexpected happened. Trump countered. Not with the reflexes of a trained fighter, but with instinct, precision, and something that made every soldier in the room lean in closer. He didn't overpower Dalton, he didn't use brute strength. Instead, he shifted his weight just enough to neutralize the move, forcing Dalton to reset. The murmurs started. Dalton narrowed his eyes, this time moving faster, more aggressively. A feint followed by a controlled force meant to pin Trump, but again Trump reacted. His movement wasn't polished, but it was tactical, adaptive, and disturbingly effective. The murmurs turned to outright disbelief. Dalton, now fully focused, stepped back and reassessed. Where the hell did he learn that? Trump, unfazed, adjusted his cuffs and smirked. "Come on, Sergeant. Don't hold back." And just like that, the entire room realized this wasn't a joke. The room, once filled with the rhythmic sounds of combat training, had fallen into a stunned silence. Soldiers who had spent years training in advanced combat techniques were now witnessing something they couldn't comprehend. A former U.S. president wasn't just holding his own against a seasoned Green Beret. He was countering with skill that suggested experience, not luck. Dalton reset his stance, his jaw tightening. This was no longer just an exhibition, it had become a real test. Trump's movements weren't perfect, but they were controlled, calculated. The way he shifted his weight, the way he anticipated each strike, even the way he adjusted his footing, it was tactical, not instinctual. A younger recruit standing near the back of the room whispered, "There's no way this is happening." Another soldier, arms crossed, muttered, "That wasn't luck, that was training." From the observation deck, intelligence officers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This wasn't some staged moment for cameras. It was something much bigger. Dalton exhaled, nodding slightly. If Trump wanted a real fight, he was going to get one. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged forward, determined to put an end to this. And then, in a move that no one saw coming, Trump shifted, countered, and sent Dalton to the ground. The entire room erupted into disbelief. Inside the Fort Bragg Intelligence Command Center, a group of high-ranking analysts and military officials sat watching the live surveillance feed. What they had just witnessed didn't make sense. The former President of the United States had just taken down a seasoned Green Beret combat instructor, not through brute force, but with skill that suggested something more. CIA operative Sarah Whitaker, a specialist in behavioral analysis, leaned forward, rewinding the footage. She slowed it down frame by frame, analyzing Trump's movements. "That's not amateur," she murmured. "And it's not just self-defense." Another analyst, a former Marine, squinted at the screen. "That's counter-surveillance takedown work," he said slowly. "That's field training." A heavy silence filled the room. Across the table, Pentagon Director Robert Kessler stared at the screen, then turned to his assistant. "Get me his old security files." Minutes later, a thick dossier landed in front of him. But as Kessler flipped through the pages, his expression darkened. Entire sections were redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out. Then he stopped on one unclassified entry, Moscow, 1987. He exchanged a look with Whitaker. Why would a real estate mogul have classified surveillance logs from Moscow? No one had an answer, but one thing was clear. Someone, somewhere, didn't want those answers found. The room remained eerily silent as Pentagon Director Robert Kessler stared at the heavily redacted file in front of him. The words Moscow 1987 stood out like a beacon in the sea of classified blackouts. His fingers drummed against the table as Sarah Whitaker, the CIA analyst, scanned the document over his shoulder. Why would a real estate mogul have classified surveillance logs from Moscow? She repeated, her voice lower this time, laced with unease. One of the intelligence officers, an ex-military counterintelligence expert, leaned forward. "Sir, this isn't just any security file. The way it's classified, this is presidential-level clearance." Kessler exhaled sharply. That meant even he couldn't access the full records. Someone, at a much higher level, had buried this information deep. Whitaker scrolled through archived footage, piecing together data. His movements in the fight, they weren't from a gym. They weren't sport fighting. They were adaptive, reactive. He wasn't just defending himself. He was countering with intent. Kessler leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Trump had been trained, if he had learned something in Moscow decades ago, and if that knowledge had been classified to this level, then what exactly had he been involved in? He picked up his phone, his voice tight. "Find out who authorized these redactions, and get me someone who can tell me what the hell happened in 1987. Because if today proved anything, Trump hadn't forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted to remind people that he still remembered." As Trump left Fort Bragg, his tie still loosened, jacket draped over his shoulder, he showed no sign that anything unusual had happened. He didn't speak to the press, didn't issue a statement, didn't acknowledge the stunned expressions on the faces of the elite soldiers still watching him go. But inside the base, and even more so behind closed doors in Washington, a storm was brewing. Back in the Pentagon, Robert Kessler's office was no longer quiet. Phones were ringing, classified files were being pulled, and higher-ups in the intelligence community were suddenly very, very interested in what had just occurred. CIA analyst Sarah Whitaker's voice cut through the noise. "Sir, we have another problem." She turned her monitor to reveal an incoming report. The training room footage had been flagged. Not by Fort Bragg, not by the Pentagon, but by an external intelligence group. Kessler's stomach tightened. Someone else had been watching. He exhaled. "Who?" Whitaker's face paled as she read the encryption code. She looked up. "We don't know, but they had clearance." The realization was immediate. Whatever Trump had just done wasn't just being noticed, it was being studied. And if someone outside the U.S. intelligence community had taken interest, then this was bigger than just a military sparring match. This was a message, and the question now wasn't just what Trump knew, it was who else knew it too. Donald Trump walked into Fort Bragg an open book, but walked out a question mark. No press, no spectacle, no carefully crafted narrative, just an unannounced visit that sent ripples through the intelligence community. Inside Pentagon offices, files were being re-examined, clearances were being quietly updated, and high-ranking officials who once believed they understood Trump were now second-guessing everything. The classified surveillance logs from Moscow, 1987, the redacted security details, the unexpected combat instincts, it all pointed to a past no one had accounted for. Somewhere in a secure room, a senior analyst watched the footage again, pausing on the moment Trump countered the Green Beret with precision. Her voice was barely a whisper. He wasn't fighting like a politician. The intelligence world feared one thing above all else: an unknown variable. And on that day, Trump reminded them that he was still unpredictable. The story of Donald Trump's unannounced visit to Fort Bragg is a reminder that power isn't just about status, wealth, or influence. It's about what you know and what others don't. For years, the world has viewed Trump as a businessman, a politician, and a media figure. But the moment he stepped onto that training mat, encountered a seasoned Green Beret, it became clear that there was something deeper beneath the surface. Something that even the most powerful intelligence officials hadn't fully accounted for. This story teaches us that the past never truly stays buried. Secrets, especially those hidden behind redacted documents and classified files, have a way of resurfacing when least expected. Trump didn't just remind people of his presence. He reminded them that there are things about him they might never fully understand. In a world where predictability is a weapon, being an unknown variable is the greatest power of all. Never assume you know everything about someone, because the moment you do, they just might surprise you in ways you never saw coming.